All right, we are back with 6.2 of the AP World Curriculum today. State expansion from 1750 to 1900. You notice I've got a little friend with me today. This is Coco. She's going to hang out with me just for today, likely because she's brand new in our house and not really wanting to be left alone too much. So together we're going to talk to you about how states are going to expand during this era of imperialism. What you need to know is that state power is going to shift in various parts of the world. States that have existing colonies will often strengthen their control or maybe take direct control over non-state entities. We're going to talk about those. Those non-state entities are things like the joint stock companies that would control territories. European states, the United States, Japan, and Asia will all acquire new territories, while Spain and Portugal's influence in the world will decline. European states are going to use different tactics from warfare to diplomacy to expand in the continent of Africa. In some places, European states will form what are called settler colonies. Finally, the United States, Russia, and Japan are going to expand their holdings by conquering and settling in neighboring territories. So let's take a closer look at direct control that some states will take over their colonial holdings. For example, the British East India Company was the entity that held British territory in India through the late 16 into the 1700s. And they're going to, over time, through the 1700s and into the 1800s, take control of even more of the Indian subcontinent as local Indian rulers fractured. But conflicts within India that we'll talk about at a later date in the 19th century will lead the British government to take direct control of their Indian subcontinent colonies. We're going to see expanding empires thanks to new technologies like steamships and railroads. We've got a cure for malaria now called quinine thanks to the Columbian Exchange. New weapons like the Maxim gun, an early machine gun, will allow European states to expand their holdings in Africa. The British will control much of East Africa with a goal of completing what's called the Cape to Cairo Railway. The French are going to be in control of much of North and West Africa, from Algeria across to the Atlantic coast in West Africa. In Southeast Asia, the prospects of producing rubber drew the French to take control of French Indochina, and the Dutch expanding their control of earlier holdings from the Dutch East India Company in Indonesia. Britain is also involved in Southeast Asia in the Malay Peninsula. That's right at the Straits of Malacca, a very important trade route. The British will control Australia and New Zealand. The United States are going to imperialize the Philippines and Hawaii in the Pacific. Japan will expand into East Asia. So we've got all of these industrialized powers looking to expand their overseas empires. You can't have all that expansion without some states in decline. And that's going to be Spain and Portugal losing their influence in the Americas through the 19th century following revolutionary movements. And the Qing dynasty in China will see itself divided into what are known as spheres of influence by European powers, where the Qing dynasty is experiencing less and less control over its empire. Now, there are different methods for these states to gain control over territory. We're going to look at Africa, where both warfare and diplomacy were used. Warfare, Britain would send armies to expand in Africa. For example, in South Africa, where they would wage battle against the Zulu kingdom. They would lose an initial battle against the Zulu in South Africa, but then win later battles. The Italian armies attempted to defeat Ethiopians at the Battle of Adawa in 1896, but they would actually lose that battle. And then there would sometimes be diplomatic expansion. Now, this could come in two forms. Sometimes Europeans working with local African kingdoms to gain some land access. But oftentimes it was Europeans working with other Europeans. For example, at the Berlin Conference in 1884, where European states worked with each other to divide available African lands between them without any care or consideration for the Africans that lived within those territories. Some colonies around the world became known as settler colonies. These would be places that would experience large numbers of Europeans moving to them to establish permanent settlements. A couple examples of these would be the French along the Algerian Mediterranean coast, and the British moving to South Africa, Australia, or New Zealand. With regard to the United States, Russia, and Japan, these three nations are also going to experience a lot of expansion, but more in their own local region initially. The United States and the concept of manifest destiny. This is the belief of Americans that God had granted Americans the right to control from the Atlantic all the way to the Pacific. And it was only the Americans' obligation to manifest or make that reality come true. The Russian Empire will expand to the Pacific coast and beyond, even including Australia, or pardon me, even including Alaska. It can be a little distracting to have a puppy on your arms, even including Alaska for a time. And Japanese expansion in East Asia will follow the Meiji Restoration and the industrialization that came with that, where Japan pushes into Korea and takes control of some of Manchuria, and Japan will take some territory from the Russians following the Russo-Japanese War. So what do we take from this? Unlike earlier eras of trading post-empires in Africa and Asia, now industrial powers were able to dominate African and Asian continents. Industrialized powers used a number of methods to expand their empires, including warfare and diplomacy. And all nations that successfully are industrialized would take part in this expansion of their empires. We will see you next time. Probably just me, but maybe this little guy will pop in at some point again. Take care.